Mount Everest has captured the world's imagination since it was first summited 70 years ago. It almost feels like a mythical place. But recently, it's turned into a graveyard.
In pursuit of the world's tallest peak, over 300 people have died and 200 bodies still remain on this massive mountain. And as climate change is melting snow and ice, these bodies are just now becoming visible to climbers and the Nepali government.
So they've launched a multi-million-dollar operation to clean up the mountain. This year, teams of expert mountaineers have retrieved 4 bodies and 1 skeleton from Mount Everest and its neighbor peaks, spending about $80,000 per body.
But before we suit up to climb Everest, we need to prep and lay some groundwork. So, Everest is over 29,000 feet, which is the world's tallest mountain, and it usually takes climbers roughly 2 months to climb the whole thing. They usually climb in spring, in May, which is after all the winter storms, but before monsoon season. And there's only a small window of time where climbers can ascend or descend something called the death zone.
The death zone is the highest stretch of the mountain, starting at 26,000 feet. This is the most dangerous part of the climb. Wind speeds are often over 62 miles per hour, and the oxygen is so thin that it can feel like running on a treadmill and breathing through a straw. Not surprisingly, most of the bodies left on the mountain are in this region, hence the name Death Zone.
It's a really intense, treacherous journey. Climbers have to navigate ice falls and deep crevasses and potential avalanches, all while managing low oxygen levels and freezing temperatures that can impair their brain and body function.
Climbers can also suffer from frostbite or altitude sickness or sheer exhaustion.
But even still, 2024 had a record high number of climbers that were willing to take the risk. Nepal's tourism department says 600 people reached the top this season, but 9 people died and 18 actually died last season.
Yeah, this is morbid, but bodies almost become like landmarks on the mountain because they're passed so frequently, and some of them are even given nicknames like Sleeping Beauty or Green Boots, and most of them are still in the position that they died.
Yeah, that was so crazy to learn about. Like, these bodies have also been there for a while. So Green Boots, for example, has been a fixture on the mountain since 1996, and seeing them has had an impact on climbers. There was a mountaineer last year that was frozen in place for 30 minutes after seeing a dead body and couldn't move, and a lot of climbers have experienced similar psychological tolls.
Oh my God!
Which is why it's so important to the Nepali government to push for and prioritize this cleanup initiative.
We spoke to Aditya Karki, the recently retired Nepali military major who oversaw this year's retrieval campaign.
I was the campaign leader, mountain cleanup campaign. Then we collaborate with the Sherpa team. There is a different roles, one for the garbage collector, then another for the dead body recover team, and the base camp management team. So
he told us each of these cleanup teams is made up of 30 people, and they go through pre-deployment training with the Nepali military for a month. And they basically learn how to get up the mountain, rescue bodies, get medical education. They also have to get insurance because of how dangerous these missions are. And then based off of all of this, core teams are made and then sent off.
So now that you're prepped, it's time to head up the mountain. It takes weeks for rescue teams to climb up and locate a dead body and acclimatize to the harsh conditions. And they work mostly at night so they don't disturb the other climbers.
As you can imagine, it is a hard life up there. Major Karki told us that you start to max out after just a couple days. Each step gets harder, appetites go down. We learned that rescue teams live off of just water, chocolate, and sawtooth, which is a mixture of chickpea, barley, and wheat flour.
Yikes. Major Karki, who's summited several times just on his own, gave us a dose of reality about what climbing Everest really entails. He said, "The mountain is beautiful from far away, but when you're living there, it's not so beautiful."
Once the rescue team locates a body, it can take them days to free it. They have to use axes to chip away at ice or boiling water to melt bodies away from Everest's frozen grip. And since these bodies are frozen stiff and they don't bend like normal bodies, they're actually really fragile. So when you're freeing them, you have to be careful that you don't break anything.
Oh, some of the pictures that Major Karki sent us were literally traumatizing. They're too graphic for us to show right now. And he told us about the time his team found a head frozen in the ice and worked for hours to free the whole body.
We saw only the head of that dead body. We started to, the melting down and the digging that body. Suddenly that weather became worse and the wind blow up to the 60 knots and all. So that is very difficult.
conditions are so temperamental with wind and snow and ice and storms that sometimes rescue teams will have to just stop a mission halfway, go back down to camp, and try again the next day.
These things are crazy. Like somebody is going up or they're reaching their the dreams to summit the Mount Everest. Some people are dragging down the bodies, at the same time.
Once the body is finally free from the snow and ice, the team wraps it in plastic and straps it to a very lightweight sled. And 12 people are needed to drag the sled in high altitudes.
And it takes so many people because the carrying capacity of each person drastically reduces at high altitudes. So Major Karki explained to us how in the death zone, even really strong Sherpas can only carry up to 55 pounds, which is less than 30% of their carrying capacity at lower altitudes.
And a body can weigh over 220 pounds with all its gear. So that's why so many rescuers are needed to pull the sled together. And if you're wondering why helicopters can't fly up and retrieve these bodies, it's because the air is too thin for them to fly. So these rescue teams need to physically drag it down 5,000 feet to where a helicopter can meet them.
The helicopters then fly to Kathmandu, which is the capital of Nepal, and that's where they're identified. So the 4 bodies that were retrieved this year were kept at a hospital. And if they can't identify the body within 3 months, the government itself will actually cremate the bodies. But it seems to be really important for the government to return bodies to the families. Like, they're in contact with all of the embassies around the world and track, who came to Nepal and who didn't go home.
Sherpas and guides keep detailed records of where every body was found to further help identify, and because Nepali law states that all bodies have to remain in the best condition before they're returned to the authorities, otherwise it could result in penalties.
And this cleanup initiative has been pretty controversial because not only is it expensive, but as we've said, it's really dangerous. Even rescue Sherpas who are like expert climbers in these regions get sick, and one even died trying to rescue a body, so then they had to send another rescue team to go get his body.
But Major Karki said there's 2 big pros to these operations. One is closure to loved ones back home who can't afford to retrieve these bodies. And 2, making the route more palatable for future generations of climbers.
And in that vein, another aspect of the cleanup operation is to actually clean up all the trash that's littered over Everest. So the Nepali government has employed over 171 guides and porters to bring back the 11 tons of garbage that's there this year.
That is so much trash. Like, a ton is 2,000 pounds, so that's 22,000 pounds of trash in 1 year, and they estimate another 50 tons remains on the mountain. It's things like gas cartridges or food packaging, oxygen bottles, tent packs, ropes, human excreta.
And in recent years, expeditions have come under pressure by the Nepali government to bring back all of their trash. Actually, the Nepali government makes climbers pay a $4,000 trash fee that they'll only get back if they bring back their garbage.
But historic trash remains from before this law was passed, some even dating back to 1957, because there were decades of climbers that just didn't clean up after themselves because it was more to carry up the mountain that they didn't want.
But there are some updates that are being worked on, like the Nepali agencies are working with private companies to start using drones for trash cleanup. So they'll be fitted with like cameras and radars and can lift up to 60 pounds.
And to put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of more than a dozen porters working for 6 hours. I like to measure things in porters.
That's your conversion rate.
And there's been another advancement recently in safety. This year, Nepal made it mandatory for all climbers to have what's called RECO reflectors on them, which are passive transponders that go in a climber's coat pocket and make them searchable without any power source.
Which is so helpful because it uses radar signals, so it's actually really easy for helicopters to locate bodies that are packed under snow from avalanches. The Nepali government might also start requiring all climbers to wear e-chips to make rescue missions easier.
And it makes sense for Nepal to implement these safety measures to reassure prospective climbers. Everest is a huge source of revenue. They make $300 million from it every year,
which makes up 10% of Nepal's total GDP. So the trekking industry and hotels and restaurants in the area all really benefit from Everest. But even so, a Nepali Supreme Court case last spring ordered the government to limit Everest permits because of all of the trash and the dangers of overcrowding.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Because something that really stuck with me after speaking to Major Karki was how welcoming he was to tourists and how it seemed like the locals wanted tourists to come visit Everest. And we hear stories of other travel hotspots where the locals despise the tourists, but that doesn't seem like the Nepali sentiment, at least on the ground.
Yeah, I wonder if that's because, You can also climb Everest through Tibet. So there's kind of like competition between the two countries. So they actually want tourists to come. I don't know if I've told you, but I actually went to Everest Base Camp through Tibet with my family like a few years ago when I was in college. And I mean, we didn't climb it or anything, but we still got like oxygen tanks and got to stay there overnight. And it was such a cool experience. And even that was like hard. So I can't imagine how people climb the whole thing.
Like hard because of altitude?
Because of altitude, and it was like cold, and it was just like harsh conditions.
Oh, but that's so cool that you were there. I mean, Mount Everest represents so much in culture. It's really the pinnacle of the spirit of exploration and pushing physical endurance. There's a reason people are lining up every year to climb it, even though they know the risk.